story. In early medieval England, warriors took turns boasting when banqueting. The boasting was expected to be enthusiastic. Egbert, a new arrival at court, seems able to outdo everyone at everything, and earlier that very day he'd saved the king from a savage attack by a wild beast. So this is, Egbert tells a tale. It was Egbert's turn to speak. The men shifted about in their seats, and you could almost hear them groan as they anticipated how he would outdo them. Egbert stood and looked around the room. He began to speak softly, and in spite of themselves, the warriors quieted down so they could hear him. When I was a young lad, I sought the hall of a famous chieftain who lives across the sea, and I fought beside him until I became skillful at combat. Although he rewarded me well and I grew rich, when none of his enemies and no man at his court could outfight me, I left to test my strength. I traveled for several months through many countries, engaging challengers, and no one defeated me. One day I came to a crossroads in a land far from the usual dwellings of men. A sightless old crone sat by the side of the road, pulling runes from a bag. "What do you seek?" she asked, hearing my approach. "I seek to know if I can vanquish the world," I said. "Ah!" She turned over a rune and felt it with her fingers. I could see it was hail. "Do you expect bad weather?" I asked. "Not I," she said. She turned toward me. "Can you be dissuaded from your quest?" "Not I," I said. "Then you must follow the yellow road until you come to a garden that's only visible by the light of the full moon." I gave the woman a silk scarf for her trouble and then rode on a little and made camp. I meant to get a good rest that night since no full moon was due for a week, but within an hour I saw one rise in the sky. I broke camp and rode along the yellow road as fast as my horse could carry me. Just before the moon went down, I spotted a garden and pulled my horse to a quick stop. Near the entrance to the garden were two lads with golden curls, dressed in yellow satin and armed with bows made of ivory. I could see the sparkling tips of their arrows arcing like shooting stars as they aimed at the retreating moon. "That'll teach her to come on the wrong night," said one. I entered a garden that was unlike any I'd ever seen. Its herbs produced leaves big enough to hide a man and giant flowers that glowed white in the dark. In the distance, I saw the largest and grandest palace I've ever seen.
Right. I will tell you that the characters in this particular excerpt are English. I'm not going to try accents. So that way you'll be able to enjoy the story a little bit. Okay. She did mention it's a sequel, and so it picks up a little bit later, so it's hopefully standalone. Roland Cutler left his carriage at the entrance to Hudson Square and regarded the street before him. Hudson Square was a tenement, its people uneducated and poor. Broken buildings littered the streets, which were unswept and filthy. The gutters were filled with sewage, dropped from the windows and thrown from the doorways of buildings housing too many people. His employer, Quinn Hancock, had written that their new client came from a poor family, but Roland was certain Quinn had no idea just how poor. He walked along but could not find numbers to indicate the buildings. The wind was cold, leaving the street bereft of people. As he walked, he saw no one to ask for directions. He finally spied a girl of about 6 who was throwing stones at the birds pecking near the stinking gutter. A dirty yellow shawl was her only protection from the cold. The birds scattered from his approach. "Hello, child. I am looking for Mrs. Nancy Lewis. Do you know where she lives?" The child gaped a moment, her tired eyes wide at the sight of his fine clothes, although he had worn just his basic business suit, with an everyday overcoat and hat. She seemed afraid, staring at his face, and after a moment he realized she'd probably never seen a man wearing glasses. He removed them, which had the unfortunate effect of startling her even more. She backed up against the wall. He sighed. "Child, it's quite all right. Please don't be frightened. These help me to see. My eyesight is quite poor." She still stared. He hesitated, wondering if he should ask someone else. The street, however, remained empty of other victims. "Do you know, Mrs. Lewis? Can you tell me which house is hers?" The girl pointed at the fragile building across the street. Like all the others, its paint was peeling, and in many places the wood crumbled with rot and termites. He turned back to his guide. "Which room is hers?" "Below," she squeaked, "next to the stairs." Ah, he saw it, a first-floor room with an entrance from the street. He pulled a coin from his pocket. "Thank you, child. You must take this to your mother and tell her that you helped her. She'll know what to do with it." The girl took the coin, her fear replaced by awe as she examined it carefully. He left her there and went to knock on Mrs. Lewis's door. Shuffling sounds followed his knock. He waited patiently. Perhaps she was older, infirm, and needed time to make the walk. The door opened at last, and a face peered at him from the darkness inside, rumpled white hair framing a regal countenance. The woman's gape was no less terrifying than the girl's had been, and he hastened to calm her fears. "Good afternoon. I am Mr. Roland Cutler, a solicitor. I bear a message from Mrs. Nancy Lewis regarding her son Edward. Are you Mrs. Lewis?"
Okay, this is a little less fanciful. Sara and Miriam, sisters, teenagers, 16, 17, are aboard the train. They've left Germany, they've left Berlin with their parents. They are actually fleeing, but the girls don't know that yet. They think they're just going to Paris to visit their grandmother. So they're currently in the station in Aachen, which is very near the border, and waiting to be underway. There's been a delay. Again, the train whistle blew, and this time they were underway, slowly slipping out of the station, while Miriam collected the candy wrappers and discarded them in the metal receptacle below the window. Mama jumped when the lid clanged shut. They chugged past a church and a school and a row of houses with red and pink flowers. Behind one of the houses, 4 children sat on a wall with their arms stuck stiffly out in a Heil Hitler salute, and below them, affixed to the wall, was a large sign. It said, "Die Juden." Sara sucked in her breath and swallowed the remains of her candy without meaning to. Papa coughed and met her eyes. Sara could hear the tick-tick-tick of his watch. If she'd been faster, she would have stood against the window, drawn shut the curtains, and shielded her family from the shocking display. Mama closed her eyes and whispered, "Guten Himmel." Sara watched Papa walk his fingers along the seat until he reached Mama's lap. He leaned over and kissed her cheek and placed his hand around her clenched fist, squeezing gently until she opened her fingers and let him twine his through hers. Leaving Aachen behind, the train traveled a few miles beside forest and field, then screeched to a halt. They'd arrived at the border. It was a routine and familiar part of every journey to see their Paris grandmother. Sara hated the closed-in confinement during this wait for the stern-faced examination of papers and passports by an officious man in uniform, but she knew the delay was finite, delineated by the confines of the German railroad's punctuality. Ordinarily, this delay at the border was expected and routine, to be endured with little more than impatience. This time was different. Both girls, sensing their parents' nervousness, watched them warily. Papa tapped his fingers one by one on the small side table below the window. Mama stared straight ahead, rubbing her fingers along the edges of her book, fluttering the pages like a deck of cards. Miriam scratched her fingernails up and down her arm vigorously enough that a red welt snaked her arm from wrist to elbow, visible even through the thin white cotton of her blouse. Sara gently slapped her sister's hand, stopping her. Miriam moved it onto her lap, tapping her fingers like she was playing the piano. Sara crossed one leg over the other and nervously jiggled her foot until she accidentally poked her father's leg with her shoe. He didn't say anything, just narrowed his eyes and frowned. She cemented her toes to the floor hard enough to make her calves ache and twirled a lock of her hair, listening to the silence. It was not that Sara and Miriam were so sheltered that they were unaware of the increased danger for themselves and for any other Jews on board as they faced official Nazi scrutiny. so much as it was that they had been so protected that they believed themselves an exception. They knew their mother had moved to a lesser position with the orchestra and stopped teaching at the conservatory, but they had been told it was because she wanted to lessen the late hours and frequent travel. They did not know that the government had forced her demotion, prohibiting Jews from holding positions in such prestigious organizations.
So this is the first section of a short story about a professor of philosophy, and it starts with a quote. "For men are good in but one way, but bad in many." Aristotle. This university's decline in the national and international rankings is of great concern, the Vice-Chancellor warned at the annual Dean's Dinner. Therefore, to improve our ranking and starting this academic year, instead of each member college setting its own final exams, questions will be selected from submissions from all the colleges, so our students take a common exam, ensuring that degrees awarded by the university reflect the same standard of academic achievement, regardless of the college attended. I was unaware of the innuendos murmured in low voices in the college staff common room at our North London campus, or at late afternoon faculty events where inexpensive South African sherry, cheddar cheese, and last week's crackers were on offer. I later learned that these had started after the Vice-Chancellor's announcement. My colleagues muttered about standards in the philosophy department. "He's simply not getting through the syllabus," they apparently complained. "He cherry-picks the easiest sections, and his lectures are just a naked attempt to ingratiate himself with his students. Of course his students love his little fireside chats, but how will they perform in the new examination system?" They agreed lower standards would reflect adversely on all of them. On Monday, 3 weeks after the Vice-Chancellor's announcement, I joined my friend Robert Willoughby, our college arts faculty dean, for lunch in the wood-panelled senior faculty dining room. The dark maroon edge-to-edge carpet, once rich in colour and thick underfoot, was worn and almost threadbare in certain areas. Dusty portraits of forgotten academics hung from the dark brown wooden picture rails positioned on all the walls. The furnishings looked as if they could be stage decorations for a play set in the previous century. Although my experience was that the dining room's cuisine only vaguely resembled the menu description, I ordered a medium rare sirloin. I was not entirely surprised that it arrived slightly charred on the outside and overdone on the inside. I wished, like Robert, I had ordered the Dover sole.
Railroad Betty. The bad seeds have become quite powerful, hovering over the railroad tracks like shadowy wraiths. Invisible to the naked eye, they feed off the energy from the accidents they cause, raiding the souls of dying travelers when they can. I don't know how they do it, but they manage to keep the red and white striped barricades from floating down to stop traffic. The orange lights still blink on and off, warning of an approaching train, but the barricades point like a stubborn cowlick straight up. I might be imagining it, but the faint scent of an ill wind seems to hover. This time I've got a plan. After all, I'm Railroad Betty, guardian of this patch of land. The vehicle approaching the tracks is a pickup truck with an elderly gentleman and 2 children in it. It says Ben's Veterinary Service on the side. Some kids are still open to the likes of me, so I'll try some tricks to contact them. They can be heroes then, making their family proud of them. Concentrating all my power on the words flat tire, I'll project that thought into their minds. The little one is playing with a silver earring she found between the seats. Guess I'll try to knock it out of her hand so I can get her attention. If I make it look like a gust of wind did it, she won't get suspicious. There, it's on the floor now. She's bending down to look for it, but her seatbelt won't let her go very far. Now's the time. Flat tire, flat tire.
Just get a little background.
This story is about a 28-year-old woman named Rachel Levine. She's an Israeli widow and has moved to southern Arkansas to take care of her dying uncle. She is going to inherit his 1,500-acre farm, and she wants to convert it to a spiritual center as a form of tikkun olam, which is a Jewish tradition of performing acts of kindness to perfect the repair of the world. There's only one problem. There's a mysterious group living in the adjacent tree-shrouded lot, and she suspects that they're white nationalists, possible neo-Nazis, and or meth cookers. And she didn't think they'd make great neighbors for a Jewish-centric spiritual center. So meanwhile, her uncle has told her a story about a local criminal kingpin named Malcolm, who he believes he's actually related to. And so, armed with this info, Rachel decides that she's going to talk to the kingpin and see if he knows who these meth cookers are in the neighborhood next door. So she goes to him at a bar and that he owns, and she tries to ingratiate herself by telling him that she thinks they're related, and to prove it she wants to get a DNA sample from him. And that request doesn't go well, and she's shown the door. So our story begins as she's walking through the parking lot after the meeting. "Don't move or I'll blow your brains out," an unfamiliar deep male voice said. Rachel felt oddly detached from the situation. In fact, a peaceful feeling washed over her, a sense of relief that the intense grief she'd endured for the past 2 years was about to end. Her mind and soul and heart accepted her imminent execution and the reunion with Ari that awaited her after death. Her body had other ideas. Years of training in the Israeli military, including Krav Maga self-defense, were an automatic response, and one that required no conscious thought. In one fluid motion, she pivoted her body around, pushing the gunman's arm aside with her hand, and lodged her other arm full force into his chest and neck. A swift knee to the groin stunned the assailant, and she grabbed the pistol, prying it from his hand with a twist. To finish him off, she gave him a swift blow to the ear with her other elbow and backed up, the firearm now firmly in her grasp, and pointed at him. He wavered. Then he appeared to lunge at her, and in a final defensive move, she pistol whipped him, connecting with his nose, which caused blood to spurt in all directions. She backed up again, and seeing him still standing, she squeezed the trigger 3 times. The barrel trained on the man's heart. Click, click, click. He crumpled it in a heap to the ground.
Been writing these blogs for about 4 years, and they're based on museum exhibits from the San Francisco Museum of Art and the Fine Art Museums in San Francisco at the De Young and at the Legion of Honor. I started to do this because I noticed that there was a feeling that I had that I could actually get people who were not interested at all in art to the museum. So that was where I started, and it's evolved. So for this exhibit on Ed Hardy, it fits right into a lot of the themes that I've been developing, and that is about outsider art. It's a topic that's very dear to my heart, and I feel that the folks in the museums and the folks in academia need to have a change of heart and to be more inclusive in what they do. So I'm trying to get people who normally wouldn't be interested in art to see the art, and I'm trying to get the academics to see the people who are interested in coming to the museum in a whole different light. So this is called Inside Out. Sometimes, without expecting it, there comes a feeling of being alive, often overlooked as another memory or sensory experience. It triggers feelings and connections that are strong painful, and beautiful. This awareness may come in many ways at any time. The way that light falls across a face, long grass waving in the breeze, and reflections on the surface of water can spark it. Or it may come by sound, a waterfall, a car, a call of some unfamiliar animal. Sometimes art activates these feelings as a kind of mixture of pleasure and suffering. These feelings get lodged in our being. We want them, and we search for more of them. Our awareness becomes attuned to them. Shapes in the clouds, scents in the gardens, stories of our ancestors. Life uses these connections to keep the living alive. They wake us up and activate deep emotions. We feel at home in ourselves. It's easy to see that Ed Hardy feels at home making art. First two rooms in his retrospective at the DeYoung open with childhood and young adult photographs, graphics, and flash drawings that show his early fascination with the media, designs, and application of tattoo. The next best thing to a real studio was using colored and cosmetic pencils to draw tattoos on his neighborhood friends. He espouses an aesthetic way to channel our personal vision into daily life. This exhibit invites us to trip the light fantastic and witness another way to embrace our rainbow culture. Ed Hardy shows us how to live in our own skin by celebrating the superpower of creativity.